If I were to ask you what is Trump's biggest economic policy, his biggest statement coming into this election in terms of what he wants to change, what would you say it is? Because I'm willing to bet that most people would say, in terms of what they've heard from Trump, that his biggest number one policy, day one when he gets in, is going to be tariffs. Which is a really interesting policy to run on as the party of business freedom, economic prosperity, and like cutting away red tape to just like let capitalism do what capitalism does. I think the reason that Trump is so focused on tariffs as like the core of his economic plan is because he has faith that most of his supporters don't actually know what tariffs do. For those of you that don't know, the basic pitch of tariffs, as Trump is framing them, is that you put an import tax on stuff that is made overseas, and that makes it more expensive. Therefore, American companies will start producing stuff in the United States, thus creating more jobs here than overseas. The issue with that is, it is the best case scenario for how the economy will respond to import duties like that. So the villain that exists here is China. With their cheap labor, they can send stuff here cheaper than it is to produce here. So let's assume that Trump puts a 100% tariff on every Chinese good that comes into the United States. So the price of everything coming from China doubles. So the Republican perspective is, hopefully American businesses look at that and say, okay, it's just going to be cheaper to produce stuff here at home. Now, the first issue that I think you should probably look at there is, look around your house and see how many things you can find that say made in China. You'll pretty quickly notice, if you didn't already know, that a massive portion of the things that you own, of the products that have been produced, that you have bought, that are in your house, are from China. China is not just a producer that makes one thing. I mean, if you look around, we're talking about cutlery, tools, computers, televisions, fridges, toys, video games, board games. Pretty much everything in your house is going to have some component that in some way was produced in China. All these products, which have not been produced in the United States for upwards of 40 years, suddenly all that manufacturing has to come back. Manufacturing that at this time does not exist. So businesses are going to have to start making stuff here again, which they haven't been doing for upwards of a generation. They have to find new companies. There is an enormous investment that they have to make into that to get these factories, hypothetical factories, up and running again to start producing goods here. First of all, there are going to be companies that just decide not to do that, or that they don't have the resources to do that, and they will just pass the cost of that new tax on Chinese imports onto their consumers and drive prices up. And even if companies decide, okay, let's play ball, let's bring everything back here and start producing here, it's going to take a hell of a lot of time. And during that interim period where the tariffs are applied, but before the several years or so where they can get production running in the United States again, well, people are just going to have to pay 100% more for these goods that they still want coming from China. Now, tariffs like this can actually work. Trump and Biden famously agree on steel tariffs and basically putting like heavy import duties on Chinese steel to make sure that the American market stays strong. The difference there being that the United States is the third largest producer of steel in the world. The infrastructure to produce steel here already existed and was being used. Those tariffs were to protect an industry that already existed. They weren't designed to create industry. And look, creating industry is a lot of work. And if companies decide that 100% markup on importing goods just still does not justify creating more industry, then you've got the worst of both worlds. In this hypothetical, I've been talking about 100% markup, so basically doubling the price to get anything in from China. That might be lowballing it, because there are going to be a lot of companies that if they decide to, are just going to be like, oh, we can actually deal with that cost, we'll just pass it on to our consumers. And you can't just respond to that by being like, oh, okay, in that case, we will make everything from China 3 times as expensive. Because that interim period between the tariffs being introduced and them finally putting together the means to like produce stuff domestically, well, during that interim period, Americans are going to be paying 3 times as much to get the stuff that they could have otherwise gotten before these tariffs were introduced at a third the price. The thing that bugs me is it's so unconservative. Like, if you were to propose tariffs to the extent to which Trump has, I think at one point he said that John Deere would have to pay a 200% tariff if they were going to move production to Mexico. I mean, if you were talking about numbers like that, the Republicans would have ostracized you in 2012 like you would not believe. I am certain that Ronald Reagan, hearing this, is spinning in his grave at a rate so extreme he could probably power a small city. I'm pretty certain that the reason Trump reframed the issue of tariffs was that it was something that he could just like throw to his supporters, which was like vaguely interpreted as like anti-globalist. Trump has presented tariffs as a very, very simple thing to his followers, and that is that they hurt China and they bring jobs back, and not much beyond that. And it just seems that everyone seems to have forgotten that the reason that we don't have tariffs is because it's good for American business because they can get access to things cheaper than they otherwise would be able to. If you're a minimum wage worker in the United States, you are probably paid around double what a Chinese factory worker is paid. And most production workers are not going to be paid minimum wage. Let's assume that some production worker is paid in the realm of like $10 to $15 an hour. That is already in the realm of 4 to 5 times more expensive in labor costs alone than producing things overseas. So like, even if you assume stuff does come back to the United States and they start making stuff again, how much do you think prices are going to go up when labor abruptly becomes 5 times more expensive? American companies are not going to sit back and say, oh, you know what? Let's just take a hit to our profits. Yeah, let's just do that. We'll protect the American consumer. They're going to pass every single penny of those new wage costs specifically onto you because they don't want to pay it. Trump thinks of tariffs, or rather, he wants his followers to think of tariffs as like an immediate fix that just makes problems go away because he doesn't actually have an economic plan. On the face of it, what he is saying in the most direct way possible is, I'm going to make it so that the cost of production goes up 4 to 5 times for the most basic goods. And all of that is going to get handed on to you. This is not a solution to the cost of living problem. This is a way to make it infinitely worse. You can attack Harris for a lack of specificity when it comes to her economic plans, but don't also pretend that Trump isn't just picking a random word, taking tariffs and throwing it to his supporters as a false promise that alone will somehow fix everything.